welcome to today's show, What is Feminism? Today we will be discussing the topic of feminism and women's rights in today's society. I think to help start, we should really look at what feminism is. The word feminism, according to the Oxford Dictionary, means the advocacy of women's rights on the grounds of equality for the sexes. Today we will be talking to Professor Ruth Robbins, Lawrence Grant and Rebecca Pedley, asking each what they think about feminism and its controversial meaning. Here with me is Professor Ruth Robbins, the head of the School of Cultural Studies and Humanities here at Leeds Met. Ruth, you have written a book, Literary Feminism. What is your outlook on the representation of women in society, and what does feminism mean to you?
Okay, feminism means a lot of different things to me, but primarily it's about rights. It's about the right to education, to vote, to be paid appropriately for the work that you do, and it's about reproductive rights. Now, that gives us choices, and we may choose to represent ourselves in lots of different ways. I don't think I'm a Puritan at all. I think it's kind of fine not to be those things. But it also gives us responsibilities, and that sometimes means we have to look more closely at the way that especially young women are being represented in our society. There are some anxieties, I think, about that.
I think many people do as well. Rebecca, you are part of our Facebook group, and you have had an active role in some of the discussions on the page. So could you please just tell us what it means to be a feminist for you personally?
To me, it's as Ruth said, it's rights. Like it's equal rights for women. It's none of this kind of bashing men, like men aren't as good as women, like women are better. It is just equal rights for women, like because everyone should be equal. That's what it means to me.
Okay. And Lawrence, as a male, many people would say that you can't be a feminist. But what would your response to that be?
I think it's ridiculous to say, because I mean, just because I don't have a vagina doesn't mean I can't have a certain mentality. And anyone who does argue this is clearly doing so from a biological perspective rather than a psychological perspective. It would be the same to say that because I'm heterosexual I can't argue for gay rights, which is wrong. I should be able to argue for whatever I feel is a good cause. So I believe that it's more of a psychological than based on what your genitals are.
Excellent, thank you. Now we're going to have a quick look at some of the responses from the members of the public about what they think feminism is.
Inner beauty to the ladies, behaving, in certain ways that is sweet and pleasant to look.
Women are seeking equality across a wide range of issues, whether it's in the workplace or elsewhere.
To me, I think I'd say that I'm a feminist, but then I say I'm not, so it's that kind of contradictive.
Movement that happened in the early 1900s.
Equality? I don't know.
Yeah, equality.
It's for us to make our own mind up, probably.
Kind, I don't know, whatever.
Females' rights for like independence.
A way of women gaining equality.
It's equality. It's better nowadays than it used to be, but I think there's still issues that people don't really.
So from this, it would seem that many people are quite confused about what feminism means and whether or not it is still relevant today. So Ruth, are you surprised with some of the public's perception of the matter?
I'm not surprised at all. Feminism has been the F word for a very, very long time, I think. And there's always been a kind of will to say that women who want rights are somehow viragos or Amazons or men-hating or horrible or unpleasant in some way. And it's a kind of the standard way of belittling the opposition, if you like. So it's quite hard for young women to say, I am a feminist. It was quite nice to see one at least saying, I am, even if she also said, well, maybe I'm not. But broadly speaking, I'm not at all surprised that people find it confusing. If you actually look at the way that feminism has been presented in the media, it has tended to be presented in a very hostile way. So if you say you're a feminist, you must be man-hating, hideous, ugly, refusing to have anything to do with the heterosexual agenda. And of course, most women who are feminists have a lot to do with the heterosexual agenda, as well as all the other agendas that might be out there.
Yeah, well, as we can see, like maybe a lot of the problem seems to stem from the word itself, feminism. So how would you feel like, what's your interpretation of this generation's view of the word itself compared to maybe generations from before?
Well, even in my own kind of youth, even when I was relatively young in the 1980s, I think it was quite hard to talk about feminism and to be a feminist. Women's lib, women's rights, those phrases that go back to the 1970s, which, by the way, is before my time, they were, again, I think, quite hostile words. Go back to the beginning of the 20th century, the early 1900s, when the campaign for the vote in this country was particularly strong. It was a campaign for suffrage, the right to vote. What did they call the women who campaigned for suffrage? They called them the suffragettes, to belittle them, to make them less threatening, less important. So you can see that there's always that kind of tension that on the one hand we may want to say, yes, we need to fight for our rights, but it's actually quite easy for the world to turn against us and say, but what do you want those things for?
Thank you very much. Very interesting points made there. We're going to move on slightly. The music industry is constantly evolving and introducing new female artists such as Miley Cyrus, who is classed as a major influence and possible role model for young women. However, this is seen by many as very controversial because of her hypersexualized persona. How do you personally feel about the message that the media is giving to this young generation?
Well, I'm not part of this generation, so perhaps that's the first thing to say, and I'm not a parent either, so I might find it I'm a bit more remote from it, perhaps, than some people are. But of course I don't find it very attractive. I think the pornification of popular culture is really worrying. Miley Cyrus is actually relatively young. She's, what, 20?
She's like our age, pretty much.
Yeah. One of the things that really has bothered me throughout my kind of thinking about feminism has been that the valuation we put on young women, the assumption is that women are at their most valued when they are young and sexually attractive. There's a real danger in that bringing together of youth and value. The sexualization of children comes actually very directly from the infantilization of women. And what I'm looking at when I look at Miley Cyrus is a very young woman. She may claim that she's in control. That twerking picture rather suggests that she isn't in control.
Yeah, like the song says, there's blurred lines with what people are saying, if they're in control or not. And also with her age and his age, the way people are represented and being exploited in some ways. Well, Lawrence, as a male yourself, how do you feel the effect is having upon young men and women through this sort of hypersexualized pornification thrust upon our face?
Well, I think Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie says it quite well, that gender binaries are very much a small, hard cage for people to escape from. And if they step outside this cage, they face a lot of persecution and prejudice, and as Dr. Robbins said, trivialised, their significance is trivialised. And I personally think that, people in the media, whether they're male or female, have these identities that are given to them, and if they step outside, they face a lot of persecution. So I think it's quite a problem. Miley Cyrus, from Hannah Montana, innocent originally, now sexually exploited. There's always an element of exploitation there for females. So.
Thank you very much. So now we're going to take a look at what the public thinks about this subject.
I think they're pretty empowered, like they're being supported, they're not like within the media, they're not being put down on, so I think they are being supported quite well.
Discriminating, but a lot of the time it's just really overlooked.
It's like a sex object, which is, devaluing the woman in a way.
I think some aspects of it are pretty shabby, to be honest.
It's all tits and ass, isn't it? Excuse my French, you know what I mean? There's not much brain power going on there.
Very sexualised. Not a woman with half naked with the perfect body. It's not going to sell, and I think that's a shame, really.
So Rebecca, have you ever felt that the way that the media portrays women has ever affected you in any kind of way?
Not as such, because I feel like I'm old enough to kind of not be influenced by things like that now, but it has made me think about the future when I'm a parent, what I want my children to be watching. I wouldn't want them to be exposed to things like Miley Cyrus, because obviously she was a child actor. The children were all watching Hannah Montana. It was a nice show for them to watch, and obviously the fans will stay with her. And now they're watching her like, she's half naked and dancing around with men on stage, like, getting her tongue out, like, encouraging them to smoke drugs and stuff, which is not the sort of thing as a parent you want your kid exposed to. So it doesn't affect. It's more like it makes me worry about younger generations, like my youngest like cousins and things, like what they're being exposed to. Like I don't think these, like I know Miley Cyrus she's obviously an adult now, but she's not. She needs to think about these things like more.
Maybe
like
a bit more conscious with
yeah,
how
conscious.
she's
Like
portraying
she
herself.
says, like, oh, I can do what I want now, but
there's consequences
to
actions,
exactly,
which people need to remember.
Like she's losing a lot of respect for it as well, I think.
So Ruth, how do you feel about this? Like, would you agree with Rebecca?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I do look around classrooms I teach in quite often, and I can see that the generation I'm teaching now, your generation, is actually more concerned with how it looks than my generation was. I think it is just there. There is more pressure to conform to certain types of ideals of female beauty, for example. So when I turned up to classes in the 1980s, we were all pretty grungy, to be honest. I turn up to a 9 o'clock class today and the majority of the girls are looking really smart, they're well made up, they're tidy, they're neat. Actually, so are the boys.
Yeah.
I don't think it's just a female problem. And I kind of regret, I resent the loss of the freedom that says you can be a bit of a scruff when you're at university.
I think we all do a little bit. Moving on a little bit, Rebecca, as we said before, you are very involved in our Facebook group, What is Feminism? So, in your opinion, to what extent do you think social media can sort of help or diminish feminism and its awareness?
I think social media is really good because, for one, it helps raise awareness as to, like you could see from the VT, that a lot of people don't really have a fixed idea of what feminism is. So I think it's good to kind of make people aware of what the actual kind of definition of feminism is, and also pages like Everyday Sexism, where women can kind of share their experiences. And I think it's good. Some women feel very threatened in everyday situations, like a lot of sexism that goes on. I think it's good for them to share their experiences, to kind of get it out there, and people can actually see what's going on like every day. And also that video, I can't remember the name of the girl that did it, but she exposed men to the same situations that women are being exposed to, like wolf whistling and shouting oh, get your ass out and all this stuff. And it's funny to see, it's funny, but it shouldn't be really it's funny because it just shows you how ridiculous it is for men to be treated like that, and it should be just as ridiculous for women to be treated like that.
Thank you. Social networking sites have indeed been beneficial as a communication platform, allowing feminists to be able to share and discuss day-to-day topics surrounding women's rights and issues. But how much does it really inform women about feminism today? A discussion about marriage titles broke out on our social media page and what the titles represent for both men and women, Mr. and Mrs. as such. So we wanted to find out the perspective of a young woman in today's society. We asked Sophie Harwood, who herself doesn't identify as a feminist, for her opinion on the matter. So let's take a quick look at what she has to say.
Feminism to me is when a person would rather have equal rights, for men and women, they feel that they're not given the rights that they deserve. I'm personally not a feminist, but some people are. I'm not a feminist because I don't moan about situations that some people see as unfair. To be honest, I don't really know that much about it, so I can't say that I am or I'm not. Because maybe if I knew more about feminism, I potentially could be feminist myself. Well, I was looking on the What is Feminism Facebook page, and I did see a couple of debates almost that I sometimes do agree with and part of me doesn't agree with. One particular post I was interested in was one about marriage and how you take the last name of the man that you're marrying, obviously when you agree to marry them. But some people are a bit funny about it and don't want to take it. But I obviously would, personally. I would definitely take the man who I'm marrying, his last name, obviously because I want to, because I'll be proud of it, because he's going to be my husband. But on the other hand, in that post, like, you don't want to have the last name. Like, they want to keep their own, because it makes them, they don't feel like they're individual anymore. So they feel that if they take the last name, it makes them theirs and not their own person. So yeah, but I don't see that as a problem. I think that's a bit much.
So there's a very interesting outlook from Sophie. Let's move on and discuss the main issues with women's rights today. So Ruth, you've seen feminism sort of develop through the years. So what do you think are sort of the main issues facing us today?
I think the main issues are actually that the gains that women have made, particularly in the West, actually have to be re-fought and re-fought. They're not for all time. It's very clear across Western Europe and in large parts of of North America, for instance, that reproductive rights are under threat. Your right to your own body and your right to choose, definitely under threat, very serious. But I think the biggest one is in developing countries where there's mass poverty, where it's very easy to say, let's not give the women anything because, let's face it, none of us have got very much. And the real kind of threats, you look at the world, what's just happened in Nigeria with 200 girls getting an education, being kidnapped for that. We talked earlier before we came on air about The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood, which was actually inspired by Afghanistan. Before the Taliban came to power in Afghanistan, it was actually quite a forward-looking country. Women did have education. How easily that was lost. And I don't think we should forget that, how easily that was lost. So the thing that bothers me most actually is female disengagement from the political process. Women died to give me the vote. I just kind of suggest you ought to use it, really.
I think, there is definitely much less engagement for everyone. People, as we saw earlier, people don't know what these things mean and what's happening. So Lawrence, what would your response to that be? Like, what do you feel are the main issues?
Well, I think a lot of men especially disregard it as completely irrelevant from their own lives, and Gloria Steinem, famously women's liberation fighter, said that being a feminist is someone who acknowledges equality and the full humanity of both sexes. And as Dr. Robbins picked up, that the Eastern world, which we've largely disregarded, aren't being treated very fairly by themselves and us. We turn our backs to them as a Western society. And it seems like a war between feminist freedom and masculine misogyny, where if the masculine misogynists don't change their views in the Western society, then we'll never come round to actually fighting it as a country, as a global population, really, because the world is globalised now. So.
Okay, so Rebecca, what's your perspective as well?
I think feminism kind of needs the help of men to become thing, like, because it is a male-led, it's male-dominated kind of world. You need the men to kind of get on board with it for it to become more successful and kind of out there. But I also think it needs to be taught more in schools as well, like more about suffragettes. Like, I know I was never taught, like, tiny bit when we were doing that sort of era, but nothing much at all taught about that. Yeah, it's the sort of thing, if you're interested in, you go and look at it yourself, but it's not taught in schools, and I think it really should be.
Thank you. Well, let's have a look and see what the public has to say about women's rights today.
Okay.
So this shows us the concern that the public have with women getting underpaid for the same effort of work as men. Ruth, have you ever experienced any sort of similar issues in the workplace?
I haven't, because I'm really, really fortunate to work for an employer that basically has done quite a lot to make the gender pay gap, which is pretty big actually in the world out there, but in universities it tends not to be quite so serious. The bigger issue in this kind of environment is that women tend not to apply for high management positions. Though we have a female vice-chancellor at Leeds Metropolitan University, she is actually pretty exceptional. There are, out of 120 or so universities in this country, I think about 6 have women at their head. And that does tell you something quite important, I think.
That's not the best percentage you would like. Right, I'm going to have to just cut you off there a little bit, but let's just take a look about what the public think about the role of men within feminism. So Ruth, have you come across any inspirational men who would identify themselves as feminists within your work area?
I have, in all sorts of ways. I'd start with my dad, but I would probably go for the husbands of the campaigning women in the late 19th century. Mr. Pankhurst, for example, Mr. Butler, who was the husband of Josephine Butler, who campaigned for the rights of prostitutes in the late 19th century. Those kind of people. They're feminists.
Right, thank you very much. We would like to thank everyone involved into the show, including Sophie Harwood, Professor Ruth Robbins, Lawrence Grant and Rebecca Pedley. This is all we have had time for today, but we hope that you've enjoyed it, and thank you very much. Goodbye.